Hi, welcome back to the channel. Now, at this point in time, I'm posting this on Patreon only. Depending on how it goes, it may become the next podcast. I haven't decided yet. I wanted to make this video for you guys initially, and I thought, oh, this starting to feel like it could be a podcast. So I still haven't decided, but if it comes out in a week's time as a podcast, then you'll understand why. Now, in the last episode of Super Yacht News, we talked about the RV Petrol and the update on it. And the story initially started as a story based on a BBC report that we'd been sent, talking about the update, the year update, the fact that it was a year since the incident, which is unbelievable that it's already a year. And the fact that these people were being represented by this law firm in the UK, and they were, still waiting for answers and stuff. It's not unusual for an investigation to take longer than a year. I think it's actually usual for it to take longer, especially one such high profile, with injuries and stuff like that. The story from the BBC is more likely just, it's a story on the anniversary, and they just want the clicks, right? So, but what we found interesting is in the process, we got some documents about the US lawsuit. A chap that we mentioned in that video called Luis Caballero, who's from Texas, and he was on board the vessel when the accident happened, and he's suing the US government for $10 million. Now, we only found out about that about an hour before we actually started to film. So that's why there's only a very small section in that video of what is happening there, because we got like 4 different documents of the court case, and there's an awful lot. There's like 20 pages in each document. So we didn't have time to really thoroughly go through it. And that's why I said probably come up with another video in the future. Well, this is one of those videos. What we're going to do next week, hopefully next week, is we're going to put out a video about AIS. Hopefully it's going to be the definitive guide to AIS, because there's a lot of misunderstandings of how it works. I mentioned in a previous video that even people who I know who are extremely knowledgeable about shipping and engineering on ships and stuff, they don't understand properly how AIS works. Everybody knows in the industry, everyone knows how it works in terms of the equipment on board, where to get the data from. It broadcasts on VHF. Everyone understands that. What people don't understand is how it goes from there to your computer, right? Like when you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, how does it get from there to the computer? And what is the difference between AIS and SAIS, satellite AIS? That's something that a lot of people don't understand, and that's what we intend to fix with a video. So anyway, the video that we're recording right now should tie into that. And by the time, if this comes out as a podcast, which will probably be next week, the video on AIS will already be out. So in terms of that, we'll be able to tie them together. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about this case in the US and explain why they've made some fundamental errors in their data collection. And even the lawyers, I mean, I don't know if the lawyers are putting forward information based on the findings of the plaintiff, Mr. Caballero, or, one of those things that I'll never understand is as far as I know, a lawyer can only put forward something that he believes to be true. If he thinks that it's not true, he cannot legitimately put that forward. They can get disbarred for purposely putting forward information they know not to be true. So I'm going to assume that the lawyers, at the time that they posted these briefs, they believed the information that was in them. And like I said, because it's such depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers about how AIS works, right? It'll all become, I think I've probably said too much before you have this information, which I'm going to go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the information of the case to bring you up to speed, so you know what's happening in that case. And like I said, the plaintiff is Luis Caballero. The defendant is the United States of America, United States Department of the Navy. Now, some of the comments I saw in the video that we put out on Friday is that the vessel wasn't owned by the U.S. Navy when that accident happened, but that's not right. That's incorrect, and I'm going to show you in this information here. So it starts. Miguel Luis Caballero is an individual residing in Houston, Texas. He brings this lawsuit for personal injuries suffered on board Defendants' vessel caused by Defendants' vessel. Mr. Caballero is a seaman employed by Oceaneering International Incorporated, a maritime contracting company based in Houston, Texas. He's worked for Oceaneering International for 22 years, and he's an assistant cook. Oceaneering International is an agent of the United States and the United States Navy, and operates pursuant to a contract with the United States and or the US Navy. As a result of this relationship, Mr. Caballero brings the lawsuit against the defendant, who is solely responsible for any failures of Oceaneering International or any other contractor working on the defendant's behalf. So in other words, Oceaneering International is an agent of the US government for the purposes of this lawsuit. And then it goes on to say that Oceaneering International assigned Mr. Caballero to the RV Petrol, a 76-meter research vessel owned by the US Navy. So there you go. There's the verification that it is indeed owned by the US Navy, and it was at the time of this incident. They actually purchased it in 2022. The US Navy's Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command purchased the vessel from Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. Oh, there you go. In October 2022. So that's proof as well that there's in the chain. There's no one between Paul Allen and the U.S. Navy. Okay, on March 22nd, 2023, the vessel was secured in a dry dock in Leith, Edinburgh, but defendants, agents, and/or servants failed to properly secure the vessel in the dry dock. Around 8:35 a.m., strong winds dislodged the vessel from its holding, causing the vessel to topple over. Oh, you all seen the videos on that, so you know what happened there. Mr. Caballero was working in the galley. He was literally thrown across the galley when the vessel dislodged from its holding, causing his body to smash into a table. He suffered serious, life-altering injuries. He was transported to the hospital. In total, 33 seamen were injured by this incident, and 21 were taken to the hospital. Mr. Caballero was transported back to the United States weeks later. He's been unable to return to work. He continues to need serious, ongoing medical care. Now, the suit is brought against the government for these reasons. There's actually a list of 15 reasons. It's negligence, basically. But then there's a list of 15 accounts of failures. Now, I'm not going to read them all out, but I'll run it up the screen and so you can pause it and you can read it. I'll read a couple of them just so you get the gist. So it's basically failing to secure the vessel in dry dock, failing to supervise employees, failing to follow the policies and procedures. And like I said, you can read the rest of them. But it's basically negligence, the fact that the vessel fell over. For the aforementioned reasons, plaintiff Mr. Caballero prays for judgment against defendant in the amount of $10 million for actual damages for mental anguish, pain and suffering, physical impairment and disfigurement, loss of enjoyment of life, past and future medical expenses, maintenance and cure, attorney's fees, past and future economic damages, including the loss of earnings and household services, interest only as allowed by law, and all such other further relief at law and in equity to which he may be justly entitled. So, there you go. So he's suing for that money. Now, 10 million sounds like a lot. It is a lot of money. I know that in the US, having medical care, ongoing medical care can be very expensive. So I kind of understand that. What I understand is that, and I don't know if this to be the case, I would imagine it would be working for the US Navy, that you would have medical insurance as well already. So you theoretically, his medical insurance should be paying for his medical care. But I don't know how that works there. I know there's lots of stories in the press about how medical companies refuse to pay, stuff like that. In actual fact, the crew of Utopia 4 that crashed into the tanker, they are suing the owner of that yacht right now because they're allegedly refusing to pay their medical expenses. So I don't know that there's nothing in this document that says that he's not getting medical care. So it says, this action is based on personal injuries allegedly sustained by plaintiff Magin Luis Caballero from Caballero, Mr. Caballero, I'm going to call him, while he was working as a cook on the RV Petrol, owned by the United States at the time of the incident. There you go. There's confirmation at the time of the incident. Oceaneering was operating the vessel as an agent of the United States and employed Caballero. And it says, when a public vessel is operated by a private corporation under contract with the United States, the private operator becomes the agent of the United States. As Caballero alleges, on the 22nd of March 2023, the vessel was in dry dock in Leith, Scotland, when it was dislodged and toppled over. There is a rule, and I'm not a legal expert, so I might be using the wrong terminology here, but it says arguments. This is taken from the lawsuit. So it says, in general, a civil action under this chapter shall be brought in the district court of the United States for the district in which the vessel or cargo is found within the United States. Vessel or cargo outside territorial waters. If the vessel or cargo is outside the territorial waters of the United States, the action shall be brought in the district court of the United States in which any plaintiff resides. So, in other words, I'm sure you've got that anyway, but just for people like me who are not that smart, if the vessel's in the US when the accident occurs, you have to sue in the district where it is. So if it's in New York, you have to sue in New York. If the vessel was outside of the country, when the lawsuit is filed, sorry, not when the accident occurs, but when the lawsuit is filed, if the vessel is in New York, you have to sue in New York. If it's outside of the US, you can sue in your own district, right? Which is where he's from, Texas, so he sued in Texas. Now, this sounds like an inconsequential thing to most of us, to me at least. I would assume you're thinking, why is that significant? Why is that a problem? It appears to be a reason for the motion for the actual case to be dismissed in the court, because they're saying he filed in the wrong place. He filed in Texas when he should have filed in Florida, because the vessel was in Florida when he filed his lawsuit. Now, he filed his lawsuit on the 1st of September 2023. So as a result of this, the government has filed a motion to dismiss or a motion to transfer the venue to the correct venue. As a result of that motion, the plaintiff, I assume this means his lawyers, the plaintiff has tried to argue that the vessel was not inside the US at the time. So this is where the next section comes into play, is that there's an argument of where the vessel was at the time, and the misuse of AIS data has come into play here. This is why I'm focused on it, because I'm not a legal expert. So you know, I wouldn't want to get into purely a legal thing just based on the fact that it's a legal thing, because I'm not in any way qualified to talk about the merits of a case or anything like that. And I don't mean I'm not taking sides. We never take sides on the channel anyway. I'm certainly not taking sides here. I don't for a minute doubt that this person was injured if he was on board that vessel when it fell over. So I hope he gets what he deserves in the terms of satisfaction of, if he's been disabled and he's unable to work and all that stuff. I hope he gets what he needs. So it's certainly not from that point of view. I'm sure the US government doesn't deny that he was injured on board and doesn't deny that he deserves to be compensated. Again, I'm not putting words in their mouth, but I can't imagine the US government doesn't think he deserves to be helped in his new predicament based on the fact that he was injured whilst working for the US government, right? I don't think any reasonable person would disagree with that statement. Anyway, we'll go back to the thing. It says the venue provision of the Public Vessels Act, the PVA. It says, in general, a civil action under this chapter shall be brought in the District Court of the United States for the district in which the vessel or cargo is found within the United States. So as a result of that, now the US government is saying, well, the vessel was in the US at the time that this lawsuit was brought. And because of that, it seems to me, it looks like it's a reason to dismiss the case. So it says the US seeks, the US being the defendant, the US seeks dismissal or transfer of the case to the Middle District of Florida under 28 USC for the reasons set forth below. Mr. Caballero filed suit under the PVA, the Public Vessels Act, in Houston, Texas, where he resides because he believed the vessel was still outside the territorial waters of the US at the time. The US disputes this and seeks complete dismissal or transfer to Florida because the US claims the vessel arrived in Florida before Mr. Caballero sued, which was on September the 1st, 2023, and therefore PVA Venue provision required Mr. Caballero to file in Tampa. So I hope that's clear now. Like I said, this was very confusing for us. It took us a while to work it out. But the short version of that is he filed in the wrong state and it needs to be filed in the right area. But as a result of that, they're filing for a motion to dismiss, which sounds harsh to me. But it's probably like a formal, it's probably a standard format, right? You know, that this happens, therefore we're going to dismiss it, not saying that it can't reapply in Florida. They're just going to dismiss it because it's in the wrong court. That's what it sounds like to me. Now it says dismissal or versus transfer. Courts should examine the plaintiff's reason for filing suit in the improper district in the first place and ask whether the plaintiff's belief the venue was proper was in good faith and reasonable. On the other hand, if a plaintiff's attorney reasonably could have foreseen that the forum in which the suit was filed was improper, the courts often dismiss rather than transfer under section blah, 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 on the idea that similar conduct should be discouraged. Mr. Caballero presents evidence that includes satellite tracking information and admissions from 2 crew members who were agents of the US that show that the vessel did not arrive in Tampa, Florida before he sued on September the 1st. This factual dispute requires that the conflict be resolved in Mr. Caballero's favor. Therefore, this court should deny defendant's motion. So the short recap of that is that they're saying that he believes he's going to show proof that the vessel was not in the US at the time. Now, I have to take exception to that because I know that that's incorrect. But the paragraph before there that says that if he believes in good faith that he believes the vessel was outside, then you know, they should understand why he believes that it was outside. And when I show you the data, it's reasonable to assume, if you didn't know more, that the vessel did arrive after the date he filed this lawsuit. Once a defendant challenges venue, the plaintiff has the burden of demonstrating the chosen venue is proper. So obviously Mr. Caballero has to prove that he's picked the right venue to bring this lawsuit. So now the plaintiff tries to show that the ship is out of the country. Now this is where we come on to marine traffic. Now marine traffic, I'll put it up on the screen. You can see here the data confirms that the vessel, this is from the lawsuit, but I'm going to read it and then I'm going to explain. So it says, the plaintiff argues that marinetraffic.com confirms the vessel is indeed located in Tampa, Florida, but the vessel's actual time of arrival in Tampa, Florida, according to satellite data, was the 10th of October, 2023 at 9:30 local time. And then it says, furthermore, Mr. Caballero spoke to at least 2 crew members, Andre Lopez and Ronnie Jose. They work on board RV Petrol still, right? And then it says, and now you can see there's an iMessage conversation here. Now, the first one's in Spanish, so I'm translating, so bear with me. So it's Caballero says, hey, cousin. So apparently it's his cousin. I don't know whether that's a slang for friend, but it says, hey, cousin, do you know where the boat is? Andres says, yes, cousin, it's in Florida since the beginning of September. There is the boat. I don't know what I don't know. Maybe that's a poor translation. Caballero, okay, cousin, thanks. Andres says, okay, cousin, that's okay. Caballero, but what was the date? Andres says, that was like 10th of September. The ship arrived there, cousin. Caballero, okay, thanks. Okay, cousin, thanks. So this guy is apparently saying that it arrived on the 10th of September, whereas the marine traffic data shows that it arrived on the 10th of October, right? So in the second conversation, it's in English. I'm going to read it still because obviously if this is a podcast, then people listening won't know what's going on. So he's speaking to the second person that was mentioned, the name that was given, Ronnie Jose. And Ronnie says, where are you? Caballero says, I'm home. Do me a favor. I'm trying to find out where the accident boat really is. Ronnie says, it's in Florida. Caballero, since when is it there? Ronnie, about 3 months. Caballero, will it be in September or in October? Ronnie, September. He says, Caballero says, oh, okay. Okay, so he's shown marine traffic data, which shows the vessel arriving on the 10th of October. I'm going to explain to you why that's incorrect. And he's got these two people who've said that the vessel arrived. One says in September, the other one said, oh, they both said September, didn't they? Yeah. So, but they're all wrong. Now, I don't know why those guys said that, if they've got reasons to say it, or whether maybe they weren't on board. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of how marine traffic data works. If we look at marine traffic, it does show the vessel's arrival time as being the 10th of October. So how is it wrong? How is that wrong? The vessel didn't sail across the Atlantic on its own. It was towed across the Atlantic. And whilst it was being towed, the AIS was switched off on the Petrol because it wasn't under power, right? It was being towed by a tugboat, by a deep sea tugboat called the Atlantic Salver. Now, the Atlantic Salver, we covered this at the time. The Atlantic Salver was dispatched from New York. It was in New York City at the time, in that area. I don't know, around that, in the waters, the Hudson. And it sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to Scotland. It picked up the vessel and it towed it to Tampa Bay in Florida. It took 2 months to do that trip. That's a long time to be at sea. 2 months across the Atlantic. And it arrived on the 28th of June, 2023. Now, we did a video on the 30th of June. It was episode 226 of Super Yacht News. And we covered the arrival of the ship. And we even had some fans of the channel, the Bayflight 3 crew, helicopter crew in Tampa Bay. They sent us photographs of the ship sailing up the river in Tampa. I'll put them on screen so you can see them. So now like I said, the Petrol had no power during the crossing. Now, I don't know what the status of the ship was exactly. I don't know if it was towed with nobody on board or whether it had a basic crew on board and they had some power, but the AIS was switched off. I don't know. But what I do know is that the AIS was not broadcasting on that crossing, right? So that's the fundamental mistake that they made, is they used the data from the AIS of the ship when it wasn't working, and they should have been looking at the tugboat that towed it across the Atlantic. Now, they may have been unaware that it was towed across the Atlantic, but the information was out there because for one place it was on our channel, right? So what's happened then? How is it that the ship is showing that it arrived on the 10th of October? Well, the way the AIS works is AIS broadcasts on VHF, and it doesn't. This is where the misunderstanding comes from. It broadcasts locally on VHF. AIS has about a 50-mile range because it's VHF, right? It's line of sight. It can't broadcast past the curvature of the Earth. So you've got about 50-mile range. So when they switched on that AIS, when the vessel was already in Tampa Bay, they switched on the AIS, it starts broadcasting, right? And then the satellites in space, they pick up this information and then they send it down to data stations on the planet that convert the data into information, and then it goes out to marine traffic purchases this data from another company. Now, the way that marine traffic interprets that information is that, RV Petrol's arrived in Tampa Bay, right? So it sees it in the vicinity of this port, and then it sends out a signal saying, RV Petrol has arrived in Tampa Bay on the 10th of October, the time, the location, and then it's broadcasting that data. But as I've already showed, the vessel was already there from June, right? But the first time they switched on that AIS was 3 months later. Now, as a result of that, the lawyers for Mr. Caballero have come to the wrong conclusion, that the vessel's arrived in October. Another thing that the US has supplied is a witness of somebody who works in Tampa Bay. I've neglected to take his name, but I'll show you it on screen so you can read it. I don't have it in my notes here. He says, I am the vice president of Tampa Ship LLC. One of my responsibilities is to oversee the shipyard wherein the RV Petrol is currently located. On the September 1st, 2023, the RV Petrol was afloat and alongside at Tampa Ship LLC's facility in Tampa Bay, Florida. So he's basically saying, you know, when that on that date, on the 1st of September, it was already here. Now, in the suit, some of the other data that is being, the argument is that that the vessel was out of the water at the time, and as a result, it wasn't in the territorial waters of the United States because it was in a dry dock facility. Now that argument in itself is troublesome, isn't it? Because if you think about it, when the ship fell over, it was in a dry dock, right? So he's arguing that the vessel was in Scotland at the time, but in his own argument, if the vessel being out of the water means that it's not in the territorial waters of that location, then it means that it wasn't in Scotland also. Right? It's a murky subject, isn't it? I'm sure lawyers watching will be like, oh, I can argue this and that. But the reality is, even if it was out of the water in Tampa Bay, it's still in Tampa, right? So the argument is, it's a thin argument, isn't it? That it was in a dry dock, therefore it wasn't technically in the water. I don't see how any reasonable person would accept that as an argument. But what they're saying anyway is that the US have got other witnesses that say, well, in actual fact, that the boat wasn't in a dry dock in Tampa and it's been floating the whole time. I suppose they've had to cover that base just in case the judge decides to agree that being in dry dock is not the same thing, which I don't think they would, but you never know with lawyers, with judges, right? So going back to the AIS, there is a problem there with that data. That they've misread it. Another thing that came up in the lawsuit was that they had a discussion about satellite AIS, this is a big problem as well. This is where the misunderstanding that I was talking about earlier comes from, and how that data goes from the ship to satellites and then down to your computer screen, right? So when you open marine traffic and it tells you where the ship is and it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, how do they know that information? How do they get that information, right? All right, so how does AIS work? Now, because of I'm filming this before we've made the video, but by the time you see this, we should have a video out on YouTube that is a definitive guide to how AIS works. So I would recommend that you go watch that video. I'll put a link if possible. Otherwise, it's on the YouTube channel, eSysman Superyachts YouTube channel. Go and watch that video and it will be a very clear way, hopefully, of explaining how it works. But the very short version is that it's broadcast on VHF, as I already mentioned. It's the satellite in space can pick up VHF data, even though I said it only has a range of 50 miles. That's because of the curvature of the Earth, right? So, but the satellites, it's not restricted when it goes up. So the signal, when you see diagrams, they'll always show it going in a straight line, but it just goes everywhere, doesn't it? So like, here's a ship, the signal goes out like that, pow, everywhere, in every direction for 50 miles because of the curvature of the Earth, but it goes up. And the satellites pick up that data and they transfer that data to land stations. And then that's how they work out where the vessel is, right? So there's nothing in between. There's no satellite equipment on board the ship that is broadcasting to a satellite receiver. It doesn't work that way. That's the big misunderstanding of how AIS works. And as a result of that, the vessel, the marine traffic application has misunderstood what's happened. I'll give you an example of how that happens a lot. And this is why I immediately recognized it, and my team immediately recognized this flaw. We monitor a number of vessels all around the world using marine traffic at the moment. One of the vessels, Pacific X. Now, for some reason, very frequently they switch off the AIS, and I should have some emails here to be able to show you. Every time they switch off their AIS, we get an email alert that says the vessel has left the territorial waters. Right, so it says it's left because the AIS or marine traffic thinks the vessel's left because it stopped being picked up. The signal has stopped being picked up by the terrestrial receivers. Like, for some reason, the receivers or the marine traffic system is not smart enough to recognize that the vessel has simply stopped broadcasting. So it sends out this notification, but we know the vessel hasn't moved. The next day it's back, right? Or a few days later, it's in the same place, hasn't moved at all. So that's how it gets confused. Now, what am I talking about? Terrestrial receivers. Marine traffic, they have a network of terrestrial receivers, a physical receiver that sits on the shoreline of countries. I'll show you on a map here. They have thousands of them all over the world. I'll show you the British Isles, for instance, and as I zoom in, I'll put them on screen. You can see the little notification that shows locations of these receivers. And these are physical receivers, and they pick up that VHF signal that is sent. Now, when the vessel moves out, like let's say it's crossing the Atlantic, once it loses connection with the last terrestrial receiver, then the system recognizes that, and that's where it sends out that signal to say, oh, it's moved out of terrestrial waters. Now, they do also have some floating in the Atlantic Ocean, some of these receivers, so they can pick up data. But like I said, they only have a very short range. And then they augment that with the satellite information, right? They switch over to satellite. Now, if you looked at marine traffic, if you've got the free version of marine traffic, and you go out into the middle Atlantic Ocean, you click on a ship, it will say, if it's a yacht, if it's pink, it will say yacht, right? And then if you want to click on that data to find out which yacht it is, it will tell you have to purchase that information, right? And so they're restricting the satellite data, or the data that they've received by satellite. They're restricting that to make more money out of it, right? But like I said, it's all coming from that one transmission from the vessel. The fact that they've made this mistake with the vessel's whereabouts, it's understandable, right? And there's a section in there that says if he genuinely believed that the vessel was in that location at the time. Let me see. It says the court should examine the plaintiff's reasons for filing suit in the improper district in the first place and ask whether the plaintiff's belief that venue was proper was in good faith and reasonable. Now, I think that's a very good way of saying if he genuinely believed that the vessel was still out of the country, then that should be examined, and that should come into the decision of the court whether or not to dismiss or transfer, right? If it was in good faith, I don't know if there's a difference in the state laws that would be favorable to the plaintiff, right? There might be something in Texas law that is favorable for filing in Texas as opposed to filing in Florida. I don't know if that's the case. If there's any lawyers out there watching, and you know for a fact that there is, that we would be very interested to learn what that is. But that's a possibility of a reason why they filed in Texas. Now, as far as then they go on to try to prove that the vessel wasn't there, and you know the marine traffic data on its face looks like a very good argument, right? But we've proven that that's not, and it's incorrect. I think we've proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that there was that was incorrect, right? I suppose you could argue that the Atlantic Salver was just transiting the Atlantic Ocean at the time on its own, right? There's no proof. Theoretically, there's no proof that that vessel was towing the Petrol, right? Except we actually got photographs sent to us by somebody at sea showing what looks like the Petrol being towed by a tugboat, along with the positions at the time, which was in June. So we've got that. We've also got the photographic evidence sent to us by the Bayflight 3 helicopter crew showing Petrol being towed by the Atlantic Salver on the 28th of June into Tampa Bay, right? So I think that argument, if you tried to argue that the Atlantic Salver was just crossing the Atlantic on its own, I'm sure there's paperwork to prove that it picked up the Petrol in Scotland, and there's paperwork. Well, we've shown some paperwork that it arrived in Tampa Bay, and it's been in Tampa Bay, and it was in Tampa Bay on the 1st of September. So I think that argument would fall on its face. But like I said, you never underestimate the ability of a lawyer to make an argument that is that can be proven, right? I mean, look at the current events that are going on right now in the US with with reference to a certain former president who's making a lot of court cases and claims and stuff, which he alleges one thing and the government's saying another, and they're showing an awful lot of stuff on TV at least to show that that is not the case. But the lawyers are still making these arguments in court, right? So, like I said, never underestimate the ability of a lawyer to make an argument about something. But I think we can prove, at least from our point of view, whether we could prove it in court, whether or not we've got enough evidence to make it to prove something in court, I suppose that's arguable. If there are any US lawyers watching who want to make that argument against us, the data that we've shown, that would be interesting, wouldn't it, from a certain point of view, to know if we've got enough to prove it. I think we have. We've got AIS data. We've got photograph of what looks like Petrol being towed by a tug with coordinates. We've got still photographs of the Petrol arriving in Tampa. The courts, the lawyers defending the US government have shown unsworn testimony of somebody in Florida saying that he's responsible for the position or for the storage of that vessel in Tampa, and he's saying that it was there on the 1st of September. I think we've got enough. So yeah, but it's very interesting. We'll obviously keep on top of this story, and we will we'll bring it to you as soon as we have more information. I find it very interesting. I hope that the outcome of this is that they move it to Florida, and I hope that Mr. Caballero gets what he needs to deal with his new life, if that's indeed what's happened. If he's now if he has life-changing injuries, I hope him the very best. I don't wish to cause him any problems by talking about this. I don't think, like I said, we're not taking sides. We never take sides. We just bring you the information, and we're just discussing the fact that how they've misused that data. And I hope, I hope he makes a full recovery, and I hope he gets everything he needs to make a full recovery. So yeah, I'm certainly not trying to take sides in this whatsoever. We just wanted to talk about the fact that there's some bogus information getting thrown around. And like I said, it's probably been made in good faith, but it's just incorrect. Anyway, I think I'm going to wrap up. I think I've gone on long enough. If you've got any comments, please be sure to share them. It'd be very interesting to hear. Like I said, if you're a lawyer in the US and this is your area, we'd be very interested to hear from you. You can contact us, news@eSysman.co.uk. You can do it, and we can just say somebody who's a US lawyer who has experience in this area. We don't have to say your name if you don't want it. If you're happy to say who you are, we'll put that on as well. But we would be very interested to hear what you've got to think about this. All of this data that we showed, by the way, is publicly available. So it's not like we didn't get this from any dodgy sources or anything like that. It's all available online. So you can go and check it out in full for yourself if you like. I'll try and post a link to that location so you can view it yourself. But yeah, it's a very interesting read. It's a very interesting read from a certain point of view. I've read a lot of legal stuff in recent times, in the last couple of years, so I kind of started to understand it a little bit better than I used to. Not, like I said, not that I'm an expert, but the marine traffic information is very interesting. So yeah, if you're interested in that kind of thing, then maybe you'll want to take a look. But anyway, I think I'll leave it there. But yeah, like I said, I hope everything works out for Mr. Caballero. I hope everybody who's been injured gets all of the help that they need. All of the people who are in the UK. I think there's 4 different countries. The people are from 4 different countries. I know there was some people from Romania as well that were injured. They were contractors, I think, working in Scotland. I hope they all get whatever they need from this unfortunate incident. Right, I'll post a link also to the videos that we made. We actually went to Leith in Edinburgh a couple of times to film updates on this. I'll post some links to that as well if you're interested to see that backstory. and I'll post a link to the episode of Super Yacht News when the vessel arrived in Florida, which is, like I said, was on the 30th of June. So that's evident in itself, I would imagine, in a court case. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video, or this podcast, should I say, depending on how you're watching it. And like I said, check out the AIS, the definitive AIS video, once it's been released. That should give you a lot more insight into how it works, and help you to dissect what's going on here if you're still confused. If you've got any comments, leave them below. Like I said, if you're a lawyer, you can email us, or you can leave comments, whatever suits you. Yeah, and we'll leave it there. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and take it easy. Bye-bye.